Hi, I'm Leslie from Trips with Tykes, and Joe has the week off. He is somewhere in the depths of Yellowstone National Park. So, Joe, hope you're having a great vacation. But I am not doing this episode solo today. I have a very special guest. I have Becca Robbins from This Crazy Adventure Called Life. She's been on the podcast before, I guess about last year, Becca, talking about plus size travel at theme parks and Disney. So we are very, very glad to have you back.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So you have been blogging a long time. So why don't we go ahead and get the sort of plugs out of the way? You've had your blog, but we have also been partners for a very long time on the Disneyland with Kids Facebook group. So why don't you tell folks sort of who you are and what you do and what irons you have in the fire right now?
All right. As Leslie mentioned, I have my website, This Crazy Adventure Called Life, where I've been sharing for over 12 years how to go to Disneyland and other family destinations and make memories with your family. I also specialize in travel with special needs kids. And also I tell it like it is for plus size travelers and those with motion sickness. I'm part of the Disneyland with Kids Facebook group. You can find me there on social. I'm the Becca Robin. And I also am a co-host of the Castle Talk Radio podcast.
Yes, everybody should subscribe to that. That's a successor to, we used to have the Disneyland with Kids podcast as well. And I have hung up those podcasting headphones. And so Becca and Jessica have gone on with Castle Talk Radio. So folks, go give that a listen, especially if you want some West Coast Disney news, because there are not that many Disneyland focused podcasts out there. So happy to be a listener now as an occasional participant. All right. So the reason we have Becca here today is about one of her other areas of specialization, disability. And there's been a lot of talk the last couple of months. Disney, of course, recently changed the rules for the Disability Access Service, DAS, as we call it, or some people call it DAS, but we're going to go with DAS. So just to give folks a quick reminder of what the new rules are, and then we're going to talk to Becca about her recent experience. She just went to Walt Disney World with her family and has lots of advice and experiences to share. So just for folks who don't know, as of May last month and change, Disney changed the rules at Disney World, and Disneyland has changed as well. So DAS now is no longer for sort of the wide range of disabilities that a lot of folks used it for in the past. It's only for autism and Disney says similar developmental disabilities. So not for physical limitations like wheelchair users or people who can't stand or people who maybe need to take bathroom breaks frequently, things like that. So Disney does have some alternatives to DAS, like they've implemented something called return to queue, but those are not as defined and as, clear necessarily as DAS, which has been around for a long, long time. So to get approved for DAS, you need to have an online chat before your Disney vacation, online video chat up to 30 days in advance. You can do it in park at Walt Disney World. It's via a video chat while you're in the park, and at Disneyland, it's outside in the Esplanade at the old ticket booth areas. But most people, I think, are doing it in advance, and we'll talk to Becca about her experience with that. Also, new party size limitations. DAS is now limited to 4 people, including the DAS holder, or if your immediate family is bigger than 4 people, it can include your entire immediate family. Becca's a family of 5, so she's going to have some experience about that as well. Approval for DAS now lasts for 120 days. So if you have multiple Disney vacations back to back, you only have to do the process once. And then other big change for DAS, no pre-selection of rides. It used to be you could do that before your vacation. Now you can only select your rides once you scan in to enter a park each day. So it's a new kind of like Genie Plus is at Disneyland, where you have to actually enter the park. And I say Genie Plus, but by the time it's released, Genie Plus will probably soon be gone. So hopefully that'll have meaning to folks who are listening to this later. So Becca, you have been a long time user of DAS. So why don't you sort of clue folks in as to your experiences in the past, and then we'll talk about the latest experience that you had at Walt Disney World.
So I have 3 children on the spectrum, 2 of which utilize the DAS. So my 3rd child on the spectrum does not need it, so we don't use it for him, but 2 of them do. As far as in the past, we have always done the in-park. We just go to a guest services kiosk and register there. So this was our first time doing it in advance on the website because of the fact that that's the only way you can do it now, especially at Walt Disney World. And also in the past, it's been fairly easy. I let them know kind of why they can't wait in the line and what happens. and we were easily approved. And it was no problem with our whole family, even if we had an extra adult, which we sometimes do, because we could have up to 6. So this was our first time doing it online at all, but it was my first time, obviously, with the new system as it had just been released. And I thought it had gone smoothly, found out later it hadn't. And yeah, it was interesting to say the least.
All right, well, we'll get into all the nitty-gritty. So let's talk about just the pre-approval process that you went through for Walt Disney World. And you did the video chat in advance of your family's visit. How far in advance? And then how did that call go?
Yeah, so I did it about 10 days in advance because my kids were in school up until then. And we had to wait a good hour and 15 minutes, I think, before we got to the live video chat part. That's a big problem if you're getting it for a child and your kids are in school, because weekdays are also known to be the shortest waits. It's longer on the weekend. So had I been on a weekend, I don't know how long that would have taken. The call was pretty simple and easy, and I simply explained, he has cognitive disorders and overstimulation, and we have, like I said, I have 2 kids that normally use it. This being my family, the first time I'm taking my family to Walt Disney World, I was trying to keep it simple and just get one DAS because I didn't want to have to worry about booking 2 DASs constantly, things like that. We are a family of 5, like I mentioned, but we also were bringing my mother-in-law, who was another adult. I did ask if we could get the exception to have 6 people because we all have obviously a last name. We're staying in the same room. So the lady that approved our DAS said she did not think there would be a problem getting that approved. And so this was pretty straightforward for me. I got off the call thinking everything was great. I'd gotten his approved. I know for some people it's been very invasive. I do think it's cast member dependent on what you're going to get. But if you can clearly explain why they can't wait in the line, that's the big thing. It's the diagnosis, yeah, they kind of are telling you it's for those things. But if you can explain what happens when they're in the line, which I'm not going to give that detail. My son's a teenager now. I don't want to share that openly, but I just explained why he couldn't. And we got approved, and we were told we don't foresee an issue with getting the exception. So this is where the problems come in, is that you don't know when you get off that phone if you get the exception. They have to put in for it. The cast member doing your interview cannot give you the exception, is my understanding at this point. So we thought everything was great. We didn't get any pushback, really. I know other people have, but ours was pretty simple.
Got it. Do you think if you had just been the family of 5, so 2 adults and 3 kids, would that have qualified as an exception? Or does that sort of, that is an
Yes.
exception as well? So even though you were
That-
immediate family, 2 adults, 3 kids,
Yes.
that is
So
not clear.
basically what happened is we got in the park the first day, and I went to make a DAS reservation, and it said I could only make it for the person and 3 people. And so I got on the
Wow.
chat and I asked them, we thought we were getting approved for the exception. And they said, no one ever told you. I said, well, they said, we foresee no problems with that. That to me is like, hey, there has to be, they need to find a way to notify you whether you are approved for the exception ahead of time or not. Because that was the part that made me the most upset. And then I was like, well, I actually have 2 kids who need it. I only asked for 1 because I was trying to simplify this trip being their first time to Walt Disney World. Can I do it for the other kid? And they said yes. Now, I will say I got on the chat much faster. It knows that you're in the parks. It knows you're within Walt Disney World when you go to the chat, and it puts you through faster, I think, when you are live in the parks trying to get it approved, because it was a Saturday, but I was still immediately connected to someone. I mean, not immediately, but like within 5 minutes. And so the first thing that happens, I get on the live chat and they said, we checked. They never said that you were going to be approved for exception. I said, no, but they said, we don't foresee a problem, which to me is that. So I said, I know this isn't your fault. I was very kind to the cast member. I said, I do want to write an email to guest services though. So can you please tell me why we weren't approved? We're all immediate family staying in the same hotel room, that, same last name. That should be a clue. And it was because we had equal number of adults to kids. And I don't think that's a fair way for Disney to judge that. with all three of my kids being on spectrum, even though only two need DAS, who's to say, and they don't know how the adults are either, and how bad their symptoms are or their issues are. And so to say that my mother-in-law or one of the adults should be able to handle any other kids and then they go ride separately, I don't think that's really a fair way to judge it. My mother-in-law has anxiety. She also doesn't do a lot of the ride. So how are we supposed to be like, okay, one kid has to sit out with mother-in-law? And, it's not really a great way to decide. I did ask, technically my teenager is on an adult ticket. Does that mean even if my mother-in-law wasn't here, you would count him as an adult because it's an adult ticket? And they said, no, adult is 18 and over. But again, I don't think they can do that. They don't know the details of someone's needs and care. So that is not an okay reason to say you don't get it for 6 people, especially when it's obvious we were all together, all the same family.
Yeah. So just to back up for a second. So you got off the call, that original call that you had, and they said, we don't think it'll be a problem. Did you get some sort of a confirmation that you've been approved for DAS? Nothing. There's no email. There's no indication on the app, anything like that.
The only indication is that once you sign in, when you go to in the app, you go to the hamburger menu, like where you have the different buttons, the DAS was there. However, you can't try and book a DAS until you're in the park. And so we didn't know until we went to book the DAS that we could only do it for the one person and 3 people. There was no indication that approval had not gone through.
Got it. So you can see that it's been approved, but you don't know for how many people. I mean, this has got to be an issue. I'm just thinking any family of 5, right? Because the whole point is it's supposed to be, forget, let's take the grandma out of the equation. Like, that would be very bizarre that, your family of 5, one of you as an adult would have to sit out with the 3rd child. And then, or I guess maybe one adult just sits out and all 3 kids ride. Yeah.
It's hard to know. Like, for us, it would have been one adult and the 3 kids would be able to ride and 2 adults would have sat out. So that is something they definitely need to change and work on. You can't simply go off the fact that you have 3 adults. How do you know what those dynamics are? And unless they want me putting every single person on that could possibly qualify for DAS every time, because then that's just a lot more DAS things to do, right? Like, we have that many more interviews they have to do, all that kind of stuff. When I could simply just have one DAS pass, especially for that trip, that would have covered my family. It would have been so much easier for them and for me.
Got it. So what you scanned into the park, did you immediately try to book a DAS like as soon as you entered the park that morning? So a little bit later.
We had early entry. So my kids were not prepared for Walt Disney World and everything being so spread out. So they were like, we've got to hop on a ride. So we were in Epcot. And even though I hated to use my early entry for it, we hopped on Spaceship Earth and then we came out, we started walking over Epcot. And so I went to make a DAS for over there. Remy's Ratatouille adventure was down. So then we're like trying for Frozen Ever After. And it's right at the Japan Pavilion that we realized we don't have this available for all 6. And so I did a chat first. And they're like, yeah, it wasn't approved and we're not going. You can't retroactively approve 6 people. They can change the party. So like, if you get approved, it's good for 120 days. And then you're going again and it's with someone else. You can change your party, but they can't change the number of people. So we still would have been stuck with 4 people, like, as for how many people could go. So that was a big bummer having to, I sent my family to explore the Japan Pavilion while I did texts and calls and video chats. And thankfully they came back right as the video chat started and I got it for my other kid. I worried they would think that I just was getting it for my other kid because I didn't get approved. And even though he does qualify, but I think the fact that they've both been on it all the time at Disneyland maybe helped. I don't know if they have that record or not, but yeah, it was really frustrating. It was a very frustrating start to our vacation.
Yeah. So did you have any interactions with cast members within the park during that time, or was this all via app and chat?
They cannot do anything with you in the parks. You go, other than showing you how to do the DAS reservations, they cannot help you with anything. So because I did ask a cast member, we're having a little issue. They said, you have to do the chat. You have to go online. So at Walt Disney World, they cannot help you at all in person. Disneyland, you have the ticket booth you can go to, but at Walt Disney World, nothing.
Got it. So you ultimately ended up with 2 different DAS passes. How does that work logistically? Are you making essentially 2 different bookings, like one for 4 people,
For every
one for 2
ride.
people?
Yeah.
Oh,
So we would do one for 4 people, one for 2. And then you have to remember, so DAS, you basically utilize the lightning lanes for most rides. You have to scan in your DAS person first. And so we always had to have the DAS person scan in first. I would just try and put the 2 of them at the front of the line to scan in. But you had to remember, if that was not the case, like if someone was sitting out, you would have to remember who's on the DAS, like things like that. It was a little confusing at times, but in general, it was pretty easy. It just sucked. You'd have to do one reservation, then go do another. And so sometimes the times would be a little different. You'd have to make sure you went to the last person's time. So
got it. So just sort of thinking about the logistics of this as well, like you guys I know have Magic Band Pluses. So how is it assigning your like 3 accompanying guests to their Magic Bands? Like, do you have to make sure you scan in that order as well? Or okay.
yeah,
So
so
were you
the
ever at any
DAS
point just kind of
person,
using the app or
you use the app to make the reservations, but as far as scanning in, we only used our Magic Bands. So the person who has the DAS has to scan in first, and then the other guests under their DAS can scan in. Now, if I scanned one DAS person, then the next DAS person, that was fine, because on ours, we just have to have the person scanned in before us, the non-DAS users, right? It doesn't matter, even if I was like 5 minutes behind because I ran to go do something and I'm catching up, I could still scan in at that point as long as they have. So that part's easy as long as you remember the DAS person has to scan in first, because then it will pop up their picture for the cast member to okay.
got it? So this is definitely a lot of little logistics to think about, and then you throw in the monkey wrench of having 2 of them. I'm glad you figured it out. I guess this is a plug for Magic Band Plus, because I can see this a lot of fumbling if you're doing this scanning off of like your phone and
Yeah.
what order the barcodes are in and things like that. Definitely. I mean, at Disneyland, most people don't have Magic Band Plus, so this probably will
You
slow folks
want
down a
it
little
if
bit
you
more.
have this. Yeah. Even
Yeah,
if you have DAS, that's one of the reasons my family does use it at Disneyland, is because it makes DAS so much easier.
got it. All right. So, but ultimately, you were mostly able to get rides about the same time. I mean, it's not like with some other things like with Genie Plus, where you waiting 5 seconds, you could have a radically different return time. I mean, you're talking probably
Yeah.
what 5 to 10 minutes apart, right?
At most, yeah.
So, speaking of Genie Plus, which is of course soon to be retired, renamed at Disneyland but retired at Disney World, and replaced with Lightning Lane Multi and Lightning Lane Single
Single.
passes. Wow, that's going to be hard. That's a mouthful. So did you use Genie Plus at all any of the days of your trip, or did you find that like DAS was going to be adequate for what you guys needed to do?
So we used the individual lightning lane for Tron, because 3 of us want to ride Tron. I mean, I could have ridden it, but I decided to sit out. But my husband, my teenager who has DAS, and 1 kid. But the reason we decided to do individual lightning lane is because when we did the virtual queue for Cosmic Rewind, we ended up, it was 100 plus degrees while we were there, and we were staying at Epcot just to wait for our queue to be called. And so Walt Disney World is different than Disneyland. You can choose the time of your individual lightning lane. So that was a better option for us, because we were able to just choose that time so we wouldn't be stuck there waiting for our time to be called. So we used that, and then they loved it so much we got in the queue in the afternoon for it. I want to touch on this. If you get in a virtual queue, then you can use the DAS in with that, but you have to get the virtual queue first. So you can't just go up and be like, I have DAS, and your queue has to be called, your turn. And then you can go to the cast member, and they'll have a spot in Walt Disney World. Each ride had its spot where you would go to get your DAS activated for your boarding group. And so then it would switch it and you'd go through the lightning lane, but you have to get the queue first.
That's really good to know, because I know that some of those virtual queues, like you're going through the standby line, it can be really long. I mean, it could be sometimes an hour long. And then if you are somebody who needs DAS accommodations, you can't stay in the line for an hour.
In fact, Cosmic Rewind was 45 minutes. And there was no way my children on the spectrum would do that. What we did was only 2 rode Cosmic Rewind, but because we did get the virtual queue, I really wanted everyone to see the queue because it's amazing. And so the rest of us walked through with them, but we all had the DAS. So we were able to do that through the Lightning Link, thankfully. As far as Genie Plus, Lightning Link, MultiPass, we did not use it. We usually do not when we have our children that are on DAS because it does not work for us. The problem for us is both of my kids, in addition to the reasons they can't wait in line, that utilize it, become very stressed about that 1 hour return window. And even though you have a little leeway, I tell the story that I had a child that threw a chair at Plaza Inn because he was worried about his 1 hour return window hours before. But it stresses them out to the point, and this is thing, I never used the advanced one when you could pick in advance because it was also done as a 1 hour return window rather than an open-ended. Like normally you have an open-ended time after that certain time. But when you did the advance, it was a 1 hour as well. My kids can't handle that. If they were to have a meltdown in the park, I couldn't go calm them because I'd have to be worrying about that 1 hour return time. So we just don't use it with them when we go. Now I use it all the time when I'm by myself or my husband and I and our one child or me and friends. But yeah, I don't use it with my children. The DAS is what we need and it's sufficient. And we just find other things to do while we're waiting, whether it's going on a ride that has a shorter wait or sitting and enjoying a certain area, just things like that.
You ultimately found it was adequate for your trip. I mean, how many rides were you sort of able to do on a typical day? I mean, obviously, you went during the summertime, so I bet you took some big breaks in the heat of the day.
We did take a couple of big breaks. We were able, the thing was, is like, honestly, we still didn't need it for a lot of rides between doing early entry each day. Everything else, we didn't need it. We used it about for the big rides, 3 or 4 big rides a day. When you take your break, if you're going back to the same park, you can make a reservation from your hotel room if you're on Walt Disney World property. I don't know if it works when you're not on Walt Disney World property though. And we would do that for the evening when we knew we were going to go back. We would make one, like Ratatouille finally came up when we were on our midday break. So we made a return time for that. But really, in general, I think the heat was with us actually a blessing and it kept a lot of people at bay. But it worked great for us. And it was just what we needed. It wasn't like we skipped a million lines or anything, but it was enough that we wouldn't have meltdowns in lines and worry about what happens when those meltdowns occur.
I'm glad it was adequate for you and that you had a positive vacation, even in spite of the initial snafu of a start with not getting the approval for 6 people. So, but, I know you've talked to a lot of other folks in the disability community. There has been so much ink spilled, podcast time consumed, people talking about this, and so many people who haven't been approved, who think that they ought to be approved. So what are you sort of hearing from those communities? And I mean, I'm sure there are some horror stories that, accompany yours that was a success.
Honestly, I was lucky. I will say that right now. Like, I was lucky that I got cast members that were great. I think Disney had a big miss with this. Now, let's just be honest. There was rampant abuse in both parks. I have theories on why that is. I don't think we have time to get into those now. But the problem is that they're doing this because you have this means you need this. And that's not how it works. Adults are really having trouble getting approved for their needs, even if it's anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. They're being told you can leave the queue and come back. Well, a panic attack can hit within a second, right? So, and even people with seizures are being told, well, you should know in a seizure, especially if they have a dog with them, that warns them. They're like, oh, you'll know, so you can leave. That's not how this works. So the biggest problem is one, you don't have a doctor on the first call. Now, you can appeal if you get denied by the cast member, and they'll put you through to that company they're working with. I think it's Advent Health, and you'll meet with a nurse or a doctor there, but they're not your nurse or doctor. And that's the big problem is that, if it's like your former attorney, if I come to you and tell you about a legal issue, you say, I can't give you advice. because you're not my attorney. And part of it's to protect you legally, but part of it's you don't know the whole situation, right? And that's the thing. It takes people with disabilities years and years and years to get diagnosed, to find therapies that work for them and medicines that work for them. And we think that a doctor they meet for like 5 seconds online is going to be able to say, no, this is the accommodation you need. And that's just not great. As far as the return to queue alternative, that one's more for like, I look at that one as the IBS. Like that, you think that would make sense. Here's the problem that we're seeing with that return to queue. There are not cast members throughout all the queue. So it's really hard to alert a cast member. So people that have been trying to use that are having issue. Also, while most queues are able, at Walt Disney World at least, to fit scooters and wheelchairs, they are not made for scooters and wheelchairs to back out of that queue. Can you imagine being on a scooter or in a wheelchair and just needing to leave the queue and trying to get out? No, it's not going to happen. So there are a lot of things that Disney just has not thought about thoroughly. And I think that I feel like this thing was rushed, right? They could have done something different. I would honestly, as someone who uses this, I would have preferred them use something like Universal and Six Flags and Cedar Fair and all them use, which is where they have to provide documentation to a third-party agency, and then they get something that qualifies them for a year. It's good for a year. Every year you get recertified, and then you give that, it's like a card, and that card's given to the theme parks. While I was worried that was what they're going to, because it was so close to my trip, I'm like, I don't know if I can get in and to get the documentation, it would probably be better. They've got to change something because it's not working. A lot of people that you would look at them and be like, yeah, you obviously need accommodation. I heard a horror story on TikTok of someone who is blind and had other issues being told to rent an ECV, a blind person being told to rent an ECV. So
Okay.
there's some things they just need
not
to
gonna
really
work.
work on. Yeah. And for a while, they were even telling people, oh, you should get Genie Plus to do these accommodations, which is telling them to get something paid, which is not the same, especially because not everything, especially at Disneyland, there's not as much stuff with Lightning Lane as there is at Walt Disney World. So they need to change some things.
Yeah, no, I've definitely heard some stories myself. I'm not as tapped in as you are, but it does feel like it's rushed and they haven't thought through all the iterations and the individual needs of every kind of guest. And the one thing I've heard for a lot of folks who haven't been approved, who are trying to do this return to queue option, is they have to explain their disability 10 times a day to somebody who's actually less trained. I mean, whoever the cast member is at the queue is not going to be as sensitive as somebody who's doing this day in, day out on the video chats. And so that's not necessarily a great way to have a vacation, just depending upon, the person's special needs. So I'm hopeful. I mean, obviously we're getting changes to Genie Plus and we're getting this new Lightning Lane system. Hopefully, as that's rolling out, maybe additional changes will be rolled out to DAS. But, I'm glad that you had a positive experience, but I do want to acknowledge that so many people are not as a result, and it's definitely affecting vacations, and we are sensitive to that. So that's a lot. Thank you, Becca, for sharing your advice. Why don't we close this out with our traditional Disney do or don't? I know you have a tip or two that you'd like to leave with folks about DAS. What do you have to share?
Yeah. So my Disney do is that you let guest services know if you get denied or if you go and you have an experience, give them feedback. Let them know. I've recently seen where people are getting emails saying, thank you, we are adapting the program. This is a pilot program. So they are they're finally starting to listen. Also keep up on what's going on between the states. I think it's the Attorney General of Florida is starting to look at this as well. So definitely take into account that this is something that they want feedback on and give them that feedback and be as specific as you can, as you feel comfortable. Like you don't have to tell them everything that's wrong with you, but just be like, look, this is why it doesn't work for me that I use this alternative. This is why I need what you used to give me.
Great tip, Becca. So definitely, folks, share your experiences and thoughts, good, bad, and otherwise with Disney, because not going to change without that guest feedback. Becca, thank you so much for returning to the podcast. We hope you will join us again sometime in the future. Everybody, if you have thoughts, experiences to share, tweet at us at WDW Deciphered on X, Twitter, whatever it's called now, or email us, disneydeciphered@gmail.com. Joe, hope you're having fun in Yellowstone, and we look forward to having you back.